I'm Denise.
She's a non-fiction editor. And I'm Louise.
She's a fiction editor. And together,
we're the Editing Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Editing Podcast. This week we're delighted to welcome back our friend and colleague, academic editor, Hester Higton. Go on, Hester, say it.
Thank you for having me yet again. Why come on twice when you can come on 3 times?
We're going to have to change the introduction at this rate. It's the Editing Podcast with Hester Higton.
Yeah.
Right, so this time round, we're going to be focusing on non-fiction and in particular, how to assess a non-fiction editing project. And I think this is something a lot of us can benefit from, just taking that mindset and how we approach a project rather than just diving in there.
Non-fiction. Just putting my feet up, preparing to do absolutely nothing. Off you go, you two.
Now listen, you don't get off that easily, Harnby. I fully expect you to come up with lots of interesting and challenging questions.
Ooh, I can hold you both accountable. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm still taking my shoes off though. Right, just stretching my toes. So, why don't we start with a quick run through of what we're going to cover. First up is the premise of time and what you need to understand when thinking about assessing a job. And then we'll talk about the various aspects of a non-fiction editing project and identifying them.
Yeah, and then with Hester's help, we're going to look at accounting for and assigning time and also recording that information and how we establish a sensible work order. Finally, we'll wrap up with the importance of knowing how long different kinds of editing take.
Okie doke, let's start with time. Hester, what's the fundamental premise that editors need to get their heads around when assessing a project?
I think the really vital thing is to understand that words in different aspects of a project will take a different length of time to handle. Most of us editors keep records that tell us how many words per hour we can edit or proofread for a particular kind of project, or the equivalent measure. So I might say, a single author book on Renaissance history with lots of pictures. I can edit that at a rate of X thousand words per hour. Therefore, each word takes me this many seconds to process, or whatever it works out as. But it's not as simple as that. Now, I think we're going to come back to talk about this a bit later on in the episode, so that's all I'll say for now.
Fair enough.
Mysterious. That's a little teaser,
Suspense.
just to keep us hanging. Yes. So, obviously, a project isn't just one thing. It's not just this sort of...
Amorphous mass.
Amorphous mass, that was it. I was going for homogenous, I think. But, yeah. But whatever kind of project we're working on, even fiction, it's going to have different elements to it. So when it comes to assessing a non-fiction project, what are we looking at?
Oh, so many different things, Denise. So on my efficient editing course, I have an exercise where I get attendees to come up with as many different features of a project as they can think of, just so that they can get a sense of the scope of an editor's work. It's amazing how many there are, and every time I run it, there'll be something new. So we might start with obvious things like headings or indexes or quotations or bibliographies. Then somebody goes off on a tangent of web editing, and we're into the world of buttons and hyperlinks and videos and audio clips and infographics. Someone else moves on to fiction. Yes, Louise, I can find a way to drag you in. And it's issues of dialogue and flashbacks, or how to display emails and texts.
Yeah.
Then we might talk about some of the more nebulous things, such as flow, consistency of narrative, jargon, logic, sentence length, inclusive language. The possibilities seem to be endless.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So there are lots of standard things that we each expect to find in the kinds of project we work on. We can tick them off in our heads, can't we? But that exercise is a constant reminder to me that I need to be aware that there might be something totally unexpected waiting on the next page.
Forewarned is forearmed, or whatever they say. Yeah, that's a good. It means you're not sitting on your laurels. I like that. So once we know what the project comprises, all those different aspects that might turn up in one particular project, how do we go about assigning time and counting it up? And it would be really interesting to know more about how, when you're assessing a project, Hester, you go about mapping this stuff out so that you have a record of it. Do you keep it in your head, or I doubt it, or knowing you, or do you have a more structured approach like a worksheet or a spreadsheet?
No, I absolutely don't keep it in my head, though my husband tells me I keep far too many things in my head and that sometimes things fall out. Yes. I have a spreadsheet. It's not a complicated one, it's just a single page, and it simply breaks the project down into the main categories that I think are going to crop up. Main text, notes, references, captions, lists, tables, and so on. Obviously, I'll add more categories if I encounter them, and they inevitably turn up in most of the things I do. And the first thing I'll do after that is to tally the word count in each of those categories. That will generally be as straightforward as using words tool on each chapter or section, and the split that you get between texts and notes is especially useful there because you automatically know there's this much in the main text and this much in the notes. I tend to list references by the number of entries rather than words, but it doesn't really matter how you go about that. Same with headings, I tend to list how many headings there are. But what matters is that I have some sort of numerical quantity for each aspect of the project. And then if I'm working on a multi-author volume, I'll keep separate records for each chapter because that helps me to keep track of what my working rate is for more or less problematic contributions. We talked a little bit about this at the end of the previous episode about multi-author projects. Some badly written chapters can take 2 or 3 times as long as the straightforward ones, as I'm sure that Denise has experienced.
Oh, definitely. I feel you. Definitely.
And I do try to assess at the start which ones I think will be the most difficult and which the least. And then I compare that with what I think once I've completed the work. I have to tell you, it's rarely a complete match.
Yeah. And again, it's giving you a sort of shape of, because you're going through and extracting that information, it's giving you a shape of what's to come when you actually get down to the editing, isn't it? Not just in the numerical sense, but also just in you're engaging with the content, even on a fairly superficial level. You're still things are catching your eye, and you're flagging things.
That gives you that confidence and feeling of control over the project, ownership of it. Oh, you're part in it. And
you're often also already at that point noting things like, oh, we've got a really long chapter here which has only got 2 subheadings in it.
Yes,
that's a problem.
Yeah.
So you're identifying
absolutely.
those things immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay then, so can we chat about the order of play now? Because when you're editing anything, as we've talked about before, it's important to do things in a sensible order. So perhaps, Hester, you could talk about that for a bit.
And just to chip in, it would also be good to hear what we think about when we use the word sensible, and whether the order is that sensible order is the same for every non-fiction project and every editor.
Oh, that's so true, Louise, that we need to bear that in mind. We do all have different orders that work for us. So I'm going to talk about my typical order, because that's what I know about, obviously. I'll do all my cleanup routines first, and I'll perfect it to spot inconsistencies in the project. After that, I'll edit the bibliography or the reference list, and I find it really helpful to do that first, in case there are any references that need to be queried immediately with the author. That gives them something to be getting on with while I'm working on the rest of the book, and then they don't bother me.
Well, that's quite a top tip. I think we need to shout that one out, because some people, I know I used to, when I was doing social science proofreading, I used to do my references at the end because I liked it. Yes, like you too, I liked it, and I found it a nice, comfortable way to wrap things up. But I never considered that it might actually be useful for the author or the publisher to have that work done first as well, and therefore save us all time in the long run. So good shout out.
Because it means that then they can be doing that, get the information back to you before you finish the edit, hopefully, and you're not finishing your edit with a whole list of queries that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, and it is very often that reference list that generates a good chunk of the queries. Because there are often problems in them. What do I do after that? Similar, I may well look at the illustrations and captions next, in case there's anything in them that needs to be completed. Like very often you'll get missing permissions, or you won't get the full information about where an image comes from. And so again, that's something that the author can be getting on with while I'm doing other things. Next up is the notes and cross-checking them against the bibliography. That's probably the slowest job of all. It takes a long time to edit notes and check that both everything that's mentioned in them is in the bibliography, and that they're all styled correctly and all that kind of thing. That takes.
Esther, sorry to interrupt. Do you use a macro for that at all? Do you use like citation checker or anything?
I don't, because most of the stuff I work on is short title
right
referencing, and so you can't. And if it citation checker works, doesn't it, on Harvard referencing in the text?
Yeah, author text basically. Author date. Yeah,
author date. Sorry.
Yeah.
So no, I can't. I wish there was something equivalent, but the trouble is that the way short title referencing systems work, there is no one way of doing it.
Yeah.
And so there's no one thing that you can tell to a program to do.
To do that, yeah. So when you're working on your short title, I'm assuming you keep a list of your short titles as you shorten them so that you've got consistency throughout it. Are you using any kind of system for that then?
I mostly just doing that with a find throughout the document.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a very straightforward thing rather than having a separate list of what they are.
Got you. Thank you.
Then if there are a lot of tables or lists in the book, I will handle them separately. Otherwise, I might incorporate them in the main edit. It depends. That wonderful phrase. Then I get down to the main text itself, referring back to everything I've learned about the project from the other materials. And I don't have a definite point at which I tackle the prelims and aftermatter. It tends to depend on the project.
Yeah.
What I like about working in this way is that I get the hard graft out of the way first, but focusing on all the peripherals, as I've said before, gives me a sense of the content of the book. And that means it's usually a breeze when it comes to editing the main text itself. It goes through like a dream, assuming that it's been written well.
So that's back to the previous episode. It's an efficiency tool as well. Doing that, doing things in whatever sensible means to you. That order means that you're working. Not only are you enjoying it and you find the main actual text edit is less cluttered and not simplified. That's probably the wrong word, but more streamlined. But it's actually more efficient too.
Yeah, you can be confident when you've done all the peripherals, as you call them, Hester. When you've done all that first, you're not having to stop when you're reading through the text when you reach something, because you know you've already dealt with it.
Exactly.
Which is a nice feeling. Yeah.
What about you two?
I do a very similar thing. What about you?
I definitely have an order in which I do things. I think I talked about it during another episode where I like to check all my chapter numbers are chronological. I like to check the text edit for me is still the biggest part of the process, and because I'm line editing, it is I can't say that I don't have all these other complexities or separate tasks to do, but I definitely have an order of play. I have a structure to how I do things. I like to create my chapter summaries as I've completed a chapter so that it's fresh in my head, rather than doing that all in one, trying to go back and do that separately. So yeah, there's definitely an order, but it's sensible to me as a fiction editor. It doesn't mean it would necessarily be sensible to another fiction editor.
I think the more, whatever method you use, I think the more you consciously assess a project and go through it and look at all these elements, like Hester's saying, and break it down, particularly for non-fiction, and think about the time that's going to be involved and what's going to take, the better you get at it for a start, because you can review it at the end and see how accurate you were, but the more you can tie it to when you are asked to quote on a project, how do you know?
But I think
how long
I think
something's
there's
going to
something
take.
else as well. I think that once you've taken the time to kind of understand your own practice and how you assess a project you work on, it feels like it's harking back to that essence of sort of reflecting on your own practice. So when we do training courses initially with people, when we're starting out, we, again, like Hester mentioned earlier, we might hear recommendations from other people about how to do things, but once you actually start to implement this, you start to work out what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and then you ask yourself, why isn't it working for me? And that can be as valuable. So something not working for you can be as valuable and tell you as much about your own practice and your own way of editing and the way the way you might make changes to the way you do things. So I'm not going to do X, but instead I'm going to do Y. That kind of self-reflection is really, really valuable for helping us become better editors. So it's that's why I love this stuff that we've been talking about, efficiency and evaluation, because it's not just in terms of helping you quote better. It feels like you become just more in tune with the work that we do. That was a bit
getting quite deep and meaningful there.
It was a little bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, but relevant.
Thanks. That's nice to know.
That wasn't at all patronising, was it? No, that was actually a very lovely observation, Louise.
Well, it's just interesting that we and the Institute we're a part of, we've been talking about continuing professional development recently and the importance of self-reflection within that. And it's just nice to know that actually when we start to make changes to our practice and introduce tools or different ways of working or thinking about different ways of working, it can feel, when am I going to find the time to do that? But actually, it's such a valuable learning process that it's just worth making the time for, because it makes you better at what you do and it makes you quicker at what you do. And if you're quicker at what you do and you can deliver better quality of what you do, you're going to get more work and you're going to earn more money.
You're going to be more confident and you're going to feel more empowered as well.
Yeah.
As, to stand your ground on certain things, which, we might come to discuss in a minute. So we mentioned time there a little bit. So I think it would be good to dig into how different parts of the project, like editing references or checking headings and different types of editing, like proofreading or copy editing or line editing, they take a bigger hit on time than when it takes to complete a project. So how do we work that out? Big question.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that different parts of a project and different kinds of editing do take different lengths of time. We mentioned this at the top of the episode, didn't we? I gave you that teaser.
Yes.
And that's why I'm so careful to keep tabs on each part of the project separately. I've learned the hard way that the time that it takes me to deal with a single word in, let's say, a table, will be completely different from the time it takes for the same word in a reference, or in a caption, or in the main text. Now, I know that doesn't sound very logical because it's just the same word multiple times, but let's think about it. When you're editing a caption or a table or a reference, there are lots of different things that you need to think about in terms of formatting or cross-checking, which simply don't come into play when you're editing the main text.
Yeah.
So 50 words worth of captions will take a particular amount of time, and it will be different from 50 words worth of a bibliography, and different again from 50 words worth of the main text.
Yeah, good point.
So I like to say a word is not a word is not a word. Because it's not.
No.
And I think that most editors consistently underestimate the time that it takes to edit all of what I'm going to call the peripheral material, and lots of it isn't peripheral, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And equally, everyone I know who's kept an analysis that breaks down a project into its parts like this has been quite astonished at just how fast they can edit running text. They say, no, my editing speeds are, 2,000 to 2,500 words per hour. And then they do the calculation and think, wow, I edit main text at 4,500 or 5,000 words now. Really?
Yeah. But it's the other stuff that gives the overall average a kick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you really have to make sure you're weighting your estimate properly if you're, assessing for
And particularly if you were asked, for example, just to edit main text, or you were given a job just to edit references or just to cross-check tables, then you know that you have to allot different amounts of time for it, because a word is not a word is not a word.
Quite. Yeah, so Denise, with all her reference editing, will know that it takes an awful lot longer to edit them.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the other thing that I do is that, going back to that spreadsheet that I mentioned earlier, is that I will use my timekeeping app. I use Toggle. Other apps are available to note how long I'm spending on each aspect of the work. So I will have the description, but will be whatever project it is, notes, or whatever project it is, captions, so that I have all that data at the end of how long it's taken me on the notes themselves, how long on the captions, and I'll enter that data into the spreadsheet when I've finished each section of work.
And that goes back to actually something you talked about in the previous episode about why batch editing different aspects of a job is so important, because it would be very, very hard if you didn't batch edit
to
actually monitor this stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas this is actually an efficient way of understanding how much each project takes.
Yeah. And I don't go into that sort of detail with my record keeping all the time. It would be incredibly tedious if I did. Imagine every time I got a journal article in, I had to create a spreadsheet and put in all this information. Doing it on big complex projects is really helpful because there's so much data there. And so I tend to check in once in a while to make sure that my speeds haven't changed. But now I'm pretty much at the stage where I can say 50 references. Oh, that'll take that long to edit. Or the main text of a badly written chapter that is 8,000 words long. Oh, I'm going to allow the X hours for that. But the reason that I can say that is that I have the data to back it up.
Yeah. You've done the work, haven't you? And that's just that's a really good reminder that sometimes as well, when you start introducing evaluation methods like this, it can feel like just another thing to add to your work process and get used to. But actually, in the longer term, you benefit from it because you don't have to do it forever.
Yeah.
You've now got to the point, Hester, where you've come to know your this stuff and say, you can check in once in a while, but you don't have to build that data set. You've done the donkey work.
Yeah. What I find really interesting about this is that, yes, we're talking about a sort of technical process of assessment and monitoring data and managing it, but also there's a reflective element in this as well, that we're able to look at that data and reflect on our practice and where we might need to seek improvements, or where we might need to do some training, to improve our efficiencies in whatever way, or maybe it even tells us we might need to look for different clients if we're, not getting, the pay for what we're doing. If we're not able to do that, it's giving you the data to back up these decisions, as well as making you a better editor, which I think is what we all want to be, really, is what we all want to be able to say that we're doing. We don't just stop learning once we feel quite established and we have a regular client base or whatever. There's always something for us to learn, and you have given us so much food for thought yet again, Hester. It's been absolutely brilliant. Yeah,
when we finish up later, I'm going to think of another 20 episodes that we need Hester's input on. Then we can really change the introduction.
That's going to be much harder work on my end.
Hester, thank you once again so much. We've had 3 tremendous episodes from you in which we've learned so much, and I hope those of you listening particularly those of you who are thinking about or want to develop your portfolio in the same areas that Hester's working in, but even if you're working in different areas, I think we can all learn something from it. I know I've learned a ton, and I've been editing for 20 odd years now, so great stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Hester. It's been great.
It has again been a pleasure.
So that's it from us. Thank you once again for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode with Hester Higton. If you want to help support the Editing Podcast, we've got a couple of options for you. The first is that you can tip us with a one-off donation of your choosing.
Or you can join our Patreon community. All our patrons get exclusive access to a huge batch of transcripts. Both the links are in the show notes. In the meantime, she's been Louise.
And she's been Hester, and she's been Denise. Join us again soon.
Bye.
Bye.